Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. I am Shervan Fashandi, a board member of Iranian Americans for Liberty, and we are honored today to host Mr. Amin Sophiamehr as a panelist, as an invited guest for this event. And the title of this event is why didn't the JCPOA tame the Islamic Republic of Iran and fail to fundamentally change its behavior? And more importantly, how that analysis affects the upcoming policy decision-making with regards to how to deal with Iran, et cetera, et cetera. It's strategizing basically on how to deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran. So I'm just going to make a short introduction. Mr. Amin Sophiamehr is a researcher on international relations at the University of Indiana, has had many publications on international relations, particularly when it comes to Iran. So without basically delving into the main topic and delving into the questions, I would like to give the chance to Mr. Sophiamehr to introduce himself to the audience. Amin, please.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to be with you guys, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, thank you for your nice introduction. I am an Iranian American. I came to the United States, I guess it was 2003. I started college. I went to college. I got my degrees in Middle Eastern studies and philosophy, and then I got my my first master is international relations, and the second is in philosophy. And now I'm a PhD candidate student at Indiana University, doing research on Al-Farabi and the influence he received from ancient philosophy. So basically, my education was a long journey. Anyway, so I did my master's research on international relationship about Iran-Iraq war and how it influenced and how it basically functioned as a vehicle to shape a new Iranian identity based on martyrdom. So I think that aspect of Islamic Republic is mostly ignored in our discussion about how to deal with the Islamic Republic. This is very important. And unfortunately, some of international theories that sees regimes as rational actors and see their ideology irrelevant to their behavior on international arena, I think they are misguided, they are reductionist. So basically here today, I want to give a comprehensive understanding of what Islamic Republic is, how to deal with it, and so basically to explain the logic behind its behavior that I think is essential to know how to deal with the United States.
Wow, that's impressive. I personally am looking forward to it. Sounds like a very interesting topic. Although the topic may not be new, but this angle, like basically analyzing from this angle, could basically provide a fresh point of view and shed light on many blind spots of like the typical mainstream understanding that you normally see in think tanks, in foreign relations think tanks in the West. So on that, actually, I wanted to touch base on that. Before focusing on how to deal with the Islamic Republic going forward, I think we need to understand what was the premise, what was the logic and the rationale behind the JCPOA. I mean, we hear over and over ad nauseum, basically, that especially people who are opposed to the JCPOA or would like to highlight its many failures, they emphasize that, oh, it was the regime lobby. It was NIAC, the regime lobby, the regime apologists in the West, both Iranian American or Westerners, other Westerners. It was the lobby that like effectively sold it to the foreign policy decision makers in the United States. And that is partially true. I do believe at least they played a role. But even if you are a lobbyist for, let's say you are a pure lobbyist for the regime, you just get paid, let's say, the most insidious way, like you get paid under the table to just support the agenda of the regime. Even in that case, the most pessimistic case, basically you have to frame your agenda in terms of the national interest, national security of the United States. Otherwise, you can't sell it to the public. You can't sell it to the politicians. Even if you pay them off, let's say, you have to provide a justification for it that makes sense for the mainstream, for many researchers in think tanks, many foreign policy experts, and so on and so forth. So that aspect is actually more important to me. What was the mainstream logic and premise behind it? And we can all acknowledge that not everybody who at the time supported JCPOA, the JCPOA, was, I don't know, like an apologist for a regime or paid off by a regime or a lobby or pseudo lobby of the regime. Many Americans sincerely, I believe, believe that the JCPOA would be good for the United States, for the world peace, stability of the region, the Middle East region, and so on and so forth. So they acted sincerely. I mean, in several aspects, they were proven wrong, but it is important to think how and why so many smart, educated, and many of them experts in this area, how they got it wrong. What was the premise behind it? So if you would like to elaborate on that.
Yeah, in order to basically to answer your questions, so if I'm allowed to give you like a long introduction about what is Islamic Republic and how it came into existence and how it managed to survive for 42 years. So basically, Islamic Republic came out a revolution. A revolution had basically ideologies, and one of the mainstream within this ideology was Islamism. So Islamism basically saw United States as decadent. So if you are familiar with Sayyid Qutb's literature, so basically he portrayed West and United States as decadent and morally corrupt, and they call it basically a new ignorance. Ignorance refers to the Islamic notion as jahiliyyah, which means like pagan world, like before Muhammad came into existence and before revelation. So in that sense, they saw the United States, particularly United States in general, the West, as a type of a new paganism, or in the sense of being anti-Islamic. So United States in this discourse is anything that Islamism is not, is anything that Islamic Republic is not. So this is one aspect of Iranian revolution ideology. The second aspect is it's leftist. It's when I say leftist, I mean basically Leninist ideology. So in that ideology, United States is the climax of imperialism and evil capitalism. So basically combining these two ideologies shaped the understanding of Iranian leaders toward the United States. This is very, very important that it still continues, it still impact Iranian foreign policy, how to see United States and how to see United States allies in the region. So that's basically what we are going to focus today. Okay, and another important aspect was that for revolutionary, the United States was the main Shah's ally. So they thought that Shah is peanut. If we destroy United States, if we discredit United States, we can topple Shah. And that basically turned out to be true in the sense that they were successful to topple the Shah's regime. So still, this idea continues till today, and still we need to take it into consideration when we're talking about the mentality or the worldview of Iranian leaders. Right, there is another component to Islamic Republic, which is basically the Iran-Iraq war that I mentioned in my introduction. So basically, Iran-Iraq war shaped Iranians' leaders' perception of power, of world, of the United States. So basically, when we talk about what type of regime Islamic Republic is, that it's basically was a product of Iranian 1979 revolution, Islamic revolution in 1979, and Iran-Iraq war, 8 war. So in that sense, hostility toward United States and Israel is ingrained and embedded into Iranians' regime's identity, and also how it has organized itself domestically. So basically, when we talk about Revolutionary Guard, one component of Revolutionary Guard ideology, mission, and aim is hostility toward United States, hostility toward Israel. They just differ how to conduct this hostility, how to basically succeed their goals in order to first somehow get rid of Israel, second, to weaken United States presence in the Middle East. So those are important. Those are very important to any analysis that we give of Islamic Republic. So basically, in other words, hostility toward United States work as an element, as a leverage, as a cause to galvanize all of the forces that are loyal to Islamic Republic within Revolutionary Guard, within the security the apparatus. So basically to galvanize them, to mobilize them. And also another aspect is to how to suppress their dissidents and the opposition. So those are.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you. All of that is very interesting, and like being born and raised in Iran up to the age of 22, I basically witnessed all of those aspects of the Islamic Republic's ideology and identity firsthand. But so that is the nature of the regime. That's the DNA of the regime, if you will. We all agree on that. Now, what about the Westerners' view of the regime? What view did they have, or what blind spots did they have that they optimistically, or one may say like naively, entered into the JCPOA and hoped for the best and expected the best, but the best never came. In fact, in many aspects, it backfired miserably. So what was based on your accurate description of the nature of the regime, what was the blind spots or the premise or logic behind the Westerners who advocated for normalizing relations with this regime?
They believe the first false premise they have is that regime type is irrelevant to what we do, to our diplomacy. Regime type is just something domestic issues. You know, it's something that we can ignore. We have diplomacy, we have leverages, we had carrots, we had club to use against Islamic Republic in order to advance our policies. So though basically it's a kind of optimism, I mean, too much optimism about the leverages and the tools they have in the West about how to change the regime's behavior. So that's a major false premise. that I think is still continuous, still is prevalent among Iranians who advocate diplomacy toward Islamic Republic. So this is one thing. The second thing is that they ignore institutions within Islamic Republic system. They ignore the system, they ignore the ideology, they ignore the balance of power within the system. So they think that, okay, so do you want moderate actually get power in Iran and just become pro-Western, pro-America, and to basically weaken what they call extremists in Iran? So make a deal with the moderate. If you make a deal with the moderate, you are going to strengthen them and help them to gradually basically democratize Iran from within. So that's another optimism that I found it unrealistic, because first of all, moderates do not basically set agenda for Iranian foreign policy. They are just conductor. So basically, Khamenei, based on the facts on the ground, basically he employed them to pursue whatever foreign policy goal that he has in his mind. Sometimes he may say the Jalili to take the harder stance or tougher stance, he will use him. Sometimes he needed Zarif to use a softer stance and give a better face and a nicer face to Islamic Republic foreign policy, he will use Zarif, So basically they ignore that part of Islamic Republic that has enough leverage, very powerful leverage, in order to compel moderates, even if we think that moderates are sincere about what they advocate, to basically to bring them in his line and use them in his purpose. So moderates, first of all, they are not going to act that powerfully within the system. So I always say that, okay, you just organize a team of 200, 300 people that are all equally like Thomas Jefferson and put them within the Iranian system and ask them, okay, go and pursue whatever Thomas Jefferson believes. After several years, Thomas Jefferson's would turn into another Zarif, another Ahmadinejad, another Saeed Jalili. So if we ignore the system, if we ignore the institutions within the system, if we ignore the power of the ideology, if we ignore the political economy of the system, how the rentier state behaves, of course we will be susceptible to all of these I call them self-deception that we see within the foreign policy circles in the United States. Lobbies cannot create something out of nothing. Ex nihilo does not exist in politics, like in nature, So basically, they, as you say, they frame things as it appeals to politicians, appeals to what politicians already believes, as what politicians like to see in reality. They act as catalysts rather than to create something out of nothing. So Iran regime's lobby in the United States, basically they do that. United States likes to see that there is an easy way, there is a less costly way to basically change Iranian behavior, to change Islamic Republic's behavior, and they think that they are so smart, and diplomacy is so magical and so basically wonderful that they can employ it, give carrots to Islamic Republic, and basically based on I think democratic peace theory, they think that, okay, if we help them to grow up, if we grow them to basically open up their markets to the world, they gradually will democratize at the end. But I think that this is another important mistake that make, because those liberal goals for Islamic Republic based on his ideology is not the ultimate end. This is what they want to avoid. It doesn't mean that they don't want material gains. Of course they want it, but this is not what they want to basically put as a grant to pursue their policies. You know, that's very different.
That's actually very interesting point you raised. So, and it's not a specific to Iran. What I'm trying to what I'm about to explain. There has been this mantra in the mainstream logic, in the mainstream understanding of foreign policy as experts. It is almost turned into a dogma that if the West, particularly the United States, opens up relations, normalizes relations with certain oppressive regimes, especially in third world, and give them financial benefits, trade benefits, and effectively help them integrate into the globalized economy, then it will inevitably and definitely lead to democratization, liberalization of the regime. And it's not totally baseless. To be fair, I personally don't believe this theory or this dogma or mantra like blindly, completely, unconditionally, but I do acknowledge that there is some truth to it. It did happen in many countries. It did happen in South Korea, particularly. It had a very oppressive regime, but it opened up economically and integrated to the global economy, turned into a mini superpower, a regional superpower, and effectively it led to liberalization and democratization of the political structure as well. It happened in Chile. It happened in many other South American countries, and also Spain after Franco, and Portugal, and several other, like Greece, and so on and so forth. So, but if you take a common denominator, like a common characteristic between most of the regimes where this transition from an oppressive regime into a more liberal democratic structure happened because of integration in the global economy, there is one common denominator between them, and that is, yes, they were oppressive, but they were mostly pro-West, if you call right-wing dictators. In the Cold War era of some dictators being directly or indirectly supported by the Soviet bloc and some by the American bloc, these dictators that either themselves or their regime successfully and relatively peacefully transitioned to democracy by just opening up democracy, by opening up the economy, they were mostly left-wing regimes. There has been like also major failures of this theory, major counter examples, if you will. And the one that comes to my mind is China. Since the 80s, in fact, many Republicans even advocated for that. I think under Nixon and Kissinger and even Reagan administration, many Republicans and Democrats alike, they effectively reached a consensus that if we open up to China and give them economic incentives, etc., it will inevitably lead to a more liberalized democratic version of the Chinese regime, Chinese Communist Party. But it did not happen. In fact, in many aspects, the Chinese Communist Party is being more oppressive now than it was probably 20 years ago, 30 years ago, with the Uyghur genocide going on, which I personally call it like the biggest genocide after the Holocaust of World War II. Millions of people, an entire ethnicity, are being effectively wiped out. So what are the blind spots of this theory, and how did it play a role in that naivete, in that overly optimistic view of JCPOA?
Okay, yeah, that's a very important point. Okay, so based on this theory, basically democratic peace theory is that the ultimate end of any nation is material gain, you know? So it comes from that philosophical view that in the modern world, I mean, if you
maximize GDP, basically.
Yeah,
you want to maximize your GDP.
Maximizing pleasure as liberal, like classical liberal philosophers say, like Bentham and others, and Smith and others. So basically, they thought that somehow liberalism can redirect human desire from glory, honor, and power seeking into material gain. Do you know? By doing this, basically you create a kind of democratic peace, because people are busy to compete over material gain and are not seeking powers. Therefore, they avoid somehow like Hobbesian state. Do you know? So okay, so Islamic Republic, exactly for this reason, exactly because it knows if it become part of the world, part of the world's economy, if it joins FATF, if it joins, I don't know, other international
World Trade Organization, for instance.
Right. It's going to change its nature from within. They call it istihale, which means that somehow metamorphosis or transformation. They think that those global systemic forces are going to change the system from within. So first of all, material gain for the Islamic Republic is not the ultimate end. The ultimate end is to gain the political domination, first within Iran, second in the region. Toward what? Toward those two main foreign policy goals, the Islamic Republic: hostility toward Israel, hostility toward United States. Everything else is dependent on these factors, even material gains. If material gains means that to join the world and you have to give up hostility toward America, hostility toward Israel, they will not do it. That's a basically false premise of JCPOA. They say if we give Islamic Republic carrots, they are going to like it. They want to say, oh, that was delicious. And they want to come and ask for more. And then we ask them to basically correct their behaviors. It's not going to happen. JCPOA was based on incompatible expectation from both sides. Islamic Republic saw it as first step and last step. The West side as a first step through a kind of basically a process. So this is a first step. We do like a confidence building. We need to actually gain mutual trust and respect. And again, we are going to do more. It didn't happen. JCPOA made Islamic Republic more offensive just because it saw it first and last step. Islamic Republic saw itself in a fight in many battles. In economical fight, which was sanctions. We didn't call them maximum pressure back then in Obama's term. We called them smart sanctions. So right. that was one front. The second front was the regional battles to basic Islamic Republic. It tries to expand its power within Yemen, within Syria, within Iraq, within Afghanistan, and Lebanon and other countries. That was the third was the missile program. And the other was basically have to fight Israel and United States in the region. So Islamic Republic thought that it cannot basically pursue its battle to all of these fronts at the same time. So it needed to make a tactical peace, basically withdraw from one of the front in order to basically advance its battle. It's fighting other fronts.
And particularly get a hold of billions of dollars of cash also. Because he needed that cash for other fronts.
If you want to wage war, if you want to do anything, you need money. That's how I'm saying that. Okay, material gain is not the ultimate aim for the regime, but this is a tool that they use to pursue the other basically foreign policy goals they have, namely regional domination. Okay, you may say that, okay, any countries actually fight for regional domination. Look at Turkey does that. Look at other countries. Look at Saudi Arabia does. Iran does the same thing, you know. But that's different. It's very different because Iran, or I should say here, Islamic Republic, not Iran. Iran, again, conduct its foreign policy goals based on that two main goals, hostility toward Israel and hostility toward United States. If you take these two from Islamic Republic, it's going to be something different. I don't know what, but it's not going to be Islamic Republic anymore. So
right.
It's different. It's different if a country based on its geopolitical logic pursue its regional domination of it. That's one thing. So I'm going to say that based on Iran's as a country, as a historical country, geopolitical logic, if it basically pursue its regional influence, it's not going to be hostility toward United States and hostility toward America. That's very different than to just say, okay, every country does the same thing, Iran does the same thing, so what's wrong with what
yeah.
Iran?
So if I understand correctly, basically, maybe we could argue that under a non-ideological, like quote unquote normal government in Iran, like let's say under the Shah or others, or before that, like, well, they had like regional ambitions, regional interests, of course, but they were not effectively married to an anti-West, anti-Zionist, anti-Israel ideology. So if I understand your broader point correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, basically your point is that the theory of democratic peace and peaceful transition to a liberal democracy in oppressive regimes with the incentive of normalizing relations, diplomatic relations, and also giving economic incentives, giving them incentives to get integrated into the global economy. That works only if the regime's identity and DNA effectively is not embedded in anti-liberal, anti-West, anti-United States, anti-Israel ideology.
Yeah.
That fails. That theory, which is the mainstream mindset, effectively in the West, it fails, and it has failed in many instances, not just Iran. Even with respect to China, one could argue that this was at least one of the reasons that it failed. Like the world opened up to China. China became a global superpower when it comes to trade and economy. Yet it can, like, forget about liberalization and democratization. It can't manage not to commit genocide. Like that's the bare minimum we ask. Like, don't ethnically cleanse your people, as simple as that. But it has not achieved that. Like despite its GDP per capita or GDP in total, like growing by tenfold, etc., etc. I mean, it has not changed the nature. Okay, so that's a very important point. So I think we elaborated enough on the premise and the motivation, the sincere motivations behind the JCPOA. Now, let's come to present. So we remember back in the summer, during the campaign season, summer and fall 2020, during the election and campaign season, the rhetoric on the Democratic side was, it was all Trump's fault. Trump screwed it up. Iran deal was working perfectly, and then Trump, out of his selfishness, screwed it up. And the only solution is to unconditionally return to the JCPOA, and everything problem would be solved. And they even included that in the Democratic Party platform. Back in August, they had the convention. It was included in that. But that's just the campaign rhetoric. As you know better than me, like when you take power, when you take the office, and you have to deal with the realities dictate themselves to you, not the other way around. And now it seems they're a little backtracking on that rhetoric to some degree, at least. President Biden came out and said, like, we're not going to lift sanctions unconditionally, and many other officials in the Biden administration have indicated that an unconditional return to the JCPOA probably won't be their first option. But that, to be fair, they have been a little, like, I would say, like flip-flopping on it. Like they have had like both sometimes contradictory positions. So what is your analysis? What is your understanding? Is unconditional return to the JCPOA, as they promised during the campaign season, is that an option for the Biden administration? Is that a realistic option that they may pursue? And if not, then what is the alternative to that?
Well, it seems that Biden wants to return to JCPOA, and Iran needs cash. So you have a study economy, I guess. So I think that's when the deal, I mean, at least in theory, happens. So, but because of facts on the ground, things are not that simple. First of all, we have an experience of Islamic republics post JCPOA behaviors. Now we know that for fact that Islamic Republic did not change, it did not tame its ambitions, it's not change its behavior, it didn't correct its malign activities in region. Still continue to be Islamic Republic, and nothing changed. So this is one thing. The second factor is that Israeli and Arabs coalition against Iran. So they think that basically if United States is not tough enough to listen to our security concerns, we are going to act independent from the United States. There is a second factor. The third factor is basically sunset clauses within JCPOA. I mean, 2023, the missiles limitation or sanctions will be lifted, and 2025, the limitation on installing new centrifuges, new generation centrifuges, is going to expire. The third one is 2013, that limits on the volume and the degree of the uranium that Iran can enrich is going to be expired. So those expressions actually approaching fast, so I don't know if the deal takes like 1 year to do negotiation by 2022, and they're going to just make a deal for 2 years, 3 years, and then crisis again is going to emerge. So I don't know, it's a very tough situation, So basically JCPOA does not stop Iran's military aspects of its atomic activities. As we see in the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. So he was basically head of Ahmad or Sepand institutions that basically work on this military aspect of nuclear activities. So JCPOA never addressed this aspect. So now Biden knows that. I mean, he can say whatever he wants in his campaigns against Trump, and Trump was reckless, blah, blah, blah. But when you want to make a deal, when you want to make a decision as a president, so you don't want to do something that, I don't know, cause Iran, helps Iran, or ignores Iran's activity to become a nuclear power. That would be a disaster. That would be a disaster not to Biden, and it would be a disaster to Democrats, So this actually prevents, I hope, this prevents Biden from doing something crazy. So I think that the only rational or I don't know, the feasible policy that Biden can take, so it's just like very small steps toward, I don't know, to somehow not to solve the problem. So maybe just postponed to face the ultimate crisis that we are going to face eventually.
Okay, so if I understand your points correctly, let me summarize them. So your point is that an automatic, unconditional return to the JCPOA definitely won't be in the best interest of the United States, and it won't be even feasible for several reasons. The first one is the facts on the ground have changed, particularly the Abrahamic Accords.
Abraham Accord.
The Abrahamic Accords between the Arab states in the Middle East region and Israel. So that's one fact. And another aspect is the regime's behavior post JCPOA, and also most probably the regime, like especially the Quds Force, the IRGC, also will show some sort of aggression. We know that, like they will, I don't know, harass or arrest some US Marines again, or attack a US military base in the regime or something, or attack maybe the oil refineries or other assets of US allies like Saudi Arabia, etc. in the region. So sometimes the regime itself basically proves our points, proves the points of the ones who oppose JCPOA. So yeah, I mean that is a feasible prediction or scenario to project. But this leads to actually my next question. My next question is like, so Biden administration cannot unconditionally go back to the JCPOA and pretend that the last 4 years never happened, because it did happen. So that's that. And then it either has to renegotiate, like basically disregard the JCPOA and renegotiate another deal from scratch, or another solution would be to just basically give it time, to just kick the can down the road. And one of the ways, especially when it comes to financial transactions, is not to lift the sanctions officially, so the sanctions stay on the book, but when it comes to enforcement, kind of loosen the enforcement, look the other way every once in a while. And it's rather easy to do that because, I mean, as you know, basically when it comes to any laws, enforcement probably is as important as the law itself. If I have a highway where I put a sign that like the local authorities put a sign that is like 60 kilometers per hour is the maximum speed, is the speed limit. But somehow there are no patrol cars, there are no cops to enforce that law. Then after a while, everybody knows that, okay, if you speed up, nobody cares, nobody gives you a ticket, and the average speed, I bet, will be 80 miles per hour or 90 miles per hour. The same way when it comes to sanctions. Probably the larger banks and financial institutions will still refrain from making or facilitating financial transactions for the regime. Why? Because even if the sanctions are not enforced seriously now, because they are still on the book, the next administration can come after them and prosecute them for the transactions that happened in previous years. This has precedent, like many European banks, many major European banks like BNP Paribas or some German banks had to pay huge, hefty penalties, like billion-dollar penalties, hundreds of millions of dollars penalties, because of effectively anti-ALM or sanction busting or other activities. But probably smaller regional banks, maybe some bank in Malaysia or wherever, they'll take the risk, hoping that they're small enough not to be prosecuted later. So what is your position on that? Like, as an interim solution, just to kick that can down the road and buy some time, is it possible that the Biden administration won't officially lift any sanctions, but somehow loosens the enforcement?
So about sanctions, actually, I'm not that optimistic that Biden want to lift them so quickly, because it's just not rational, because it's completely possible, unlikely that next government that comes to Iran basically takes steps that Biden will not like. So it's going to be against JCPOA. So I don't know, from Biden's perspective, it's not rational to do that. From Iran's perspective, is that returning to JCPOA without having a warranty that next US administration is not going to basically ignore JCPOA again. So Iran is not happy with JCPOA either, you know, United States not happy with it either. So Iran wants a stronger deal so that it's going to survive changes in governments in the United States. This means that renegotiation, you know, this means that ignoring JCPOA. But the problem is that now both sides that have higher expectations while they have less trust on each other. That makes everything extremely harder. So even Biden does not basically lift sanctions, but he doesn't enforce them. The problem is from banks or firms or companies' perspective, it's that it's a lot, you know, it's a risk, is a high risk in investment when they want to do investment. So basically, if there's a 1% risk to you lose all of your money, you better not do it, you know? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter Biden issue an order, executive orders. Okay, we are not going to enforce them, but it's not enough for companies, for firms to do business with Iran without worries, without high risk. So still the high risk for investment in Iran is really high. So Iran would not be satisfied, and Iran knows that is not going to help them. So it's not going to make them happy. So they want something more. So they want something more, and they want to give up less. And United States want more and want to give up less. So that makes everything more complicated.
Yeah, very interesting. You are right. I mean, even if the sanctions are not enforced like strictly for a while, when it comes to risk assessment, especially for mid to long-term investments, like investments in the oil and gas industry are a typical example. In the oil and gas industry, the typical horizon for the return of capital and some profit is like 5 to 10 to 15 years. So you never like build a refinery and expect to make a return in 3 years or 2 years. So when it comes to those longer term assessments, definitely any rational strategist or risk analyst would take more than one administration, at least more than one administration, into account. So that's a very valid point. It's a good point. So another question I have is, let's take a step back from Iran, from the issue of Iran, and focus a little bit on the global affairs, especially in the past few years. So what we have witnessed in the past few years is that this anti-China rhetoric after the trade war between the United States and China intensified, and after the pandemic, which was originated in China, many people blame it for that. That rhetoric, that anti-China rhetoric, is not confined to the Trumpist populist faction of the Republican Party anymore. In fact, you can see that many Democrats, like first the populist Democrats and now even mainstream Democrats, even President Biden himself, they are adopting that rhetoric. And to some degree, because there is justifiable or justified anger, if you will, like blame for China, both for how it behaves internationally and how it oppresses its own people domestically. So there are valid reasons for that. And another reason is that China is seeking global dominance, and there's no way to hide it anymore. The way they behave especially in the Asia Pacific region, they have an expansionist foreign policy and even military policy. They're building artificial islands in the sea between Philippines and China, South China Sea. They are expanding their military bases. They are building aircraft carrier ships. warships, and so on and so forth. And especially when it comes to third world countries, developing countries, all the way from Sri Lanka, Pakistan, many African countries, in strategic points, close to strategic straits for the marine trade, for instance. They engage in a practice which is called predatory lending. What do I mean by that? What predatory lending? Predatory lending means you lend to somebody, basically acting like a loan shark. You lend to somebody knowing that most probably they won't have the financial discipline to pay you back. And what is your motivation then? Your motivation, of course, is not benevolence. Your motivation is, okay, now, great. I know that this guy won't be able to pay me back, so I can go and confiscate his car or his family house or some other assets that they have. And this is what China has been doing in the past, I would say, in the past decade and a half, in the past 2 decades, especially the past decade. They lend to economies, countries with weak economies. They include covenants, conditions in that loan, basically look forward to for the obligor to default or get close to default in paying back their obligation, and then say, aha, now you have to give me a military base on that strategic port for 99 years or this and that, a permanent military base, and so on and so forth. So this has been going on regardless of the regime in Iran, regardless of what IRGC does, etc. This is the global scene, and it's kind of a reminiscence of a Second World War II, if you will, or not. Sorry, not World War II, like Second Cold War, post World War II, where you know the story. The United States and the Soviet Union were allies against the Nazi Germany, and quickly they turned into adversaries and started a lengthy Cold War. And one of the aspects of a Cold War is you try to, because both sides are too strong to engage in direct war with each other, because that would be like an existential threat, especially with the nuclear warheads. So they try to build proxy regimes for themselves. They effectively mark their territories. Now, if we adopt that view, what role do you think Iran will play in that picture, in that future, in the next 2 decades? Is China going to turn Iran into a second North Korea? Basically a rogue regime, irresponsible behavior, either has nuclear power or at least is close to building nuclear power, and then it would be effectively a boogeyman for China to put pressure on the West and say, okay, if you want me to tame this crazy guy in the world, in the international community, now give me this and that benefits, because that's how China has been milking the crisis in North Korea for the past few decades. So, and if that's China's plan, then what is the best course of action for the United States and for the West?
Yeah, so actually focusing on East Asia and particularly China, it didn't start with Trump. It started with Obama. So one of Obama's theory was that, okay, we need to withdraw from Middle East because Middle East is not that important for us. Now it's just chaos, and without it's beyond hope. So let's focus on China and East Asia. They are just emerging power that are going to challenge United States in a near future. So it started from Obama. I think it still continue in Biden, and Biden, it was the last week, he said very tough things against China, that he's going to eat on lunch or he's going to eat us, something like that, something crazy. So basically that was after 2 hours conversation with Mr. Xi, President Xi. So is China going to use Iran as a leverage to put more pressure on United States? Absolutely, it's going to do that. But we need to keep in mind that China is not Soviet Union, so China exports like $400 billion annually to United States. I don't know, during COVID has it decreased or changed, but China is well integrated into global economy, so it just does not give China enough freedom to act against United States like long-term strategies, so because it's basically shooting in its own feet. So, but it's going to use Iran. Yes, it's going to do that. Russia is going to do the same thing too, because Russia again doesn't want go beyond a certain level of tension with the West, but likes it to see that Iran doing the dirty job for them, and Iran, unfortunately for us Iranians, they are so crazy enough to go and pay whatever, it's even if it goes against Iranian national interest to do in order to fight with the United States. Yeah, China is going to do that. So what would be a sand policy for United States? So basically to basically contain Iran and
prevent that situation, maybe.
Right. Well, I don't know. It's a tough question. I mean, the first thing is that JCPOA doesn't solve this problem. I mean, I know that. I don't know what's the sand policy now. I cannot just say it right now and just be very articulate about sand policy toward this. But I know that JCPOA is not going to tame Iran's ambitions. It's going to make it worse. And China is going to take advantage of the situation, that's for sure. If Biden thinks that, okay, we return to JCPOA and we actually we pacify Iran and there we go and deal with China. No, it's not going to happen. I'm sure it's not going to happen because Iran knows that United States has problem with China and Iran is going to take advantage of this tension too. So Iran does have no option other to comply with maximum pressure. So that's a big mistake that Biden can make, to give up all the leverages that maximum pressure give him. It would be a mistake if to give them up, because Iran is money. Iran's economy is in the verge of collapse. So do not be afraid of their harsh rhetoric. They will use harsh rhetoric. According to Israelis' assessment, Iran is 2 years away from having a nuclear bomb. So 2 years is enough to basically give more time to maximum pressure to have effect on Iran. So my first advice, if Biden administration asking for advice, do not rush. I mean, take your time. Iran has no other options. Don't be deceived by their harsh rhetoric. Don't be afraid of their harsh rhetoric. They have no more option except complying with maximum pressure.
Okay, you actually touched on a very, sorry, go on. But
and it's not just nuclear. I mean, you need to see it as a package. If you return to JCPOA without addressing Iran's missile program, you haven't addressed Iran's nuclear problem as a whole, because part of it is a missile problem. So right. Iran can advance its missile program and make it okay. So there is, well, let me just mention this very quickly. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, in one of his not interviews, but his speeches, he says that Islamic Republic's policy must be to provide a kind of infrastructure for its nuclear activities, that whenever opportunities are given, they can basically achieve their aim and goals. So that's what Islamic Republic does. Okay, you solve the JCPOA, but you don't address missiles. They do the same thing, provide the infrastructure for the nuclear activities.
Okay, that's a very good point. So you touched on another related good points, that unlike the Soviet Union, which was openly hostile to the United States, basically called for the end of capitalism, like world revolution, etc., etc. Both China and Russia, two of the major adversaries of the West and the United States, they don't want to be that irresponsible. They don't want to adopt that explicitly anti-American rhetoric. And kind of ironically, because of that, they need crazy rogue states like North Korea and Iran, probably more than the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union could say it out loud that I want to destroy capitalism. These guys can't, for many reasons. They have trade relation, billions of dollars of export, import, etc. But they still want to put pressure on the global economy and international community. So they do need, as you pointed out, put it beautifully, they do need rogue states to do the dirty jobs for them sometimes and use them as boogeymen. And unfortunately, this regime has turned our country, Iran, into that. And you actually made another good point, that probably there is no magical silver bullet, and there is no magical solution for the problem of the Islamic Republic, but at least we know, like looking at the previous experiences, we know what doesn't work. What definitely doesn't work is an unconditional blind return to the JCPOA. And what does work probably is working towards a solution that encompasses both the nuclear program, as well as the missile program, as well as the support for terrorism and drug dealing, arms smuggling, etc., like proxy terrorist groups of the regime in the region, and also most importantly, the oppressive nature of the regime inside Iran, like the way they treat their own people and violate human rights, etc. And probably one solution is for the West and for the United States to support the quest of the Iranian people for freedom, for liberal democracy, for a truly normal government, responsible government, to act in their best interest in the international community. And once that happens, then all of those theories that we have, okay, if we give them a little carrot and maybe appease them in some regional ambitions, then once we have a normal government, responsible government in Iran, whose objective is mainly the national interests of Iran, the Iranian people, and get rid of this ideological regime that has effectively taken the people of Iran and its resources as hostage. Once we have that, then dealing with such a responsible regime or political structure in Iran would be much easier. A lot of these theories, integration in the global economy, etc., most of them will work as they work with many other nations that transitioned to democracy. So with that note, I would like to end this meeting, this webinar, unless you have something else to add. And also would like to thank you on behalf of the Iranian American for Liberty and our audience for your time and attending this event. Please, if you have anything.
Yeah, I just want to say that another important factor in the dynamic between the United States and Iran is Iranian people, Iran society, that increasingly actually is disillusioned with the revolution, with Islamic Republic, and they want a better government, they want a better system. They have come to that realization very costly, very painfully, tragically, that this system doesn't work. This system, people say that our enemy is inside Iran, referring to the Islamic Republic and not the United States. I think if United States ignore that voice, ignore that demand, is going to become as ally of Islamic Republic, and this is the worst thing that can happen to a greatest democracy in the world. So I think Biden has a very delicate job now to not disappoint Iranian society and respect their demand for freedom, respect their demand for good governance, and respect their demand for not supporting a brutal regime.
Exactly, and that would be in the best interest of the United States and national security of the United States as well. Okay, thank you for your time, and thanks for the good discussion.
Thank you for inviting me.